They found his teeth before they found his name. The morning fog had just begun to lift off the East River when Detective Ruzzo squinted at the blood-slicked concrete, the only sound the slow lap of water against the pier. The rest of the body was gone, vanished like so many others in that cursed corner of Manhattan. But these were no ordinary teeth. They had gold inlays, the kind only made for people who lived well, too well. Ruzzo lit a cigarette with shaking hands. He knew this was a message. The kind the Gigante crew left when someone talked. Or worse, stole. The whispers started before noon. A low-level courier named Frankie Dell went missing after dropping a package near Bleecker Street. Frankie was a runner. Not the kind of guy you'd send a message about. Unless he saw something he shouldn't have. And if he did, Vincent the Chin Gigante would make sure no one ever saw him again. This was the first body. It wouldn't be the last. The city was about to choke on secrets buried beneath concrete and silence. Frankie Dell had been no one until he vanished. Just another soldier running numbers and making small drops for the Genovese family. But he had a habit of lingering too long in places he didn't belong. The word on the street was that Frankie had stumbled into a meeting. Not just any meeting, but one with Vincent, the Chin Gigante at its center. It was supposed to be a simple handoff, a nondescript hallway behind an Italian bakery. Instead, Frankie opened the wrong door and saw something that signed his death warrant. No one dared say what it was. But those close to the street started talking in whispers. Frankie's girl disappeared that night. His cousin packed up and left town. The bakery caught fire 2 days later. Everyone who touched that secret either vanished or burned. That's how Vincent worked. He didn't yell. He erased. The Chin's silence was the loudest thing in New York City's underworld. Vincent Gigante was a ghost in a bathrobe. By day, he muttered to himself, wandered the streets of Greenwich Village, looked lost. By night, he commanded a criminal empire so vast even the FBI didn't know where it ended. His madness was theater, convincing enough to fool federal judges, but not his enemies. They knew better. They feared him. He didn't give orders in meetings. He scribbled them on napkins, passed them through priests and barbers. A whisper from the Chin was as deadly as a gunshot. In public he played the lunatic. In private, he was a war general. The act began years ago, when indictments closed in. Doctors called him paranoid schizophrenic. Prosecutors called him untouchable. But behind every slurred word was calculation. Behind every shuffle was power. Vincent wasn't losing his mind. He was hiding inside it. Before he was the Chin, he was Vincenzo, a street kid from Greenwich Village with fists of iron and a mind built for war. He boxed at the local gym, dropped out of school, and made his bones under Vito Genovese. They said he never blinked. He once walked into a rival's bar alone and came out covered in blood, dragging a broken chair leg behind him like a badge. But what made Vincent dangerous wasn't just the violence. It was the silence. He listened more than he spoke. He watched, calculated, waited. He didn't need crowds, just a plan. When Genovese rose to power, Gigante followed like a shadow. Soon, that shadow swallowed the room. He wasn't flashy. He didn't drink. He didn't brag. He simply rose, one murder, one envelope, one favor at a time. Vincent Gigante didn't just run the streets. He owned the silence between gunshots. He controlled the fear that crept in when the phone stopped ringing. His men didn't shout. They nodded. His messages weren't spoken. They arrived in envelopes, in boxes, sometimes in flames. And when he needed someone gone, they disappeared, not with noise, but with quiet precision. No one knew exactly how many bodies Vincent had buried. Some said dozens. Others said hundreds. But the truth was simple. If you saw the Chin, and you weren't supposed to, you didn't live long enough to say so. His madness wasn't a weakness. It was a shield. And while the world laughed at the man in the bathrobe, Vincent was building an empire beneath the folds of that ragged cotton robe. Before the madness, before the robes, Vincent Gigante was a boy with calloused knuckles and an empty dinner plate. He grew up in the tenements of Greenwich Village, one of 5 children born to a bricklayer and a seamstress. The streets raised him. By age 12 he was running packages. By 15 he was fighting in underground boxing rings. The neighborhood whispered that he had the devil's patience and God's right hook. But what made Vincent different wasn't just his fists, it was the way he vanished into the cracks. He spoke softly, almost shy, but his silence wasn't fear. It was control. He learned early that the loudest men died quickest. His mother prayed for him every night, clutching rosary beads so hard they left imprints on her palms. She didn't know her boy was already slipping into a world where prayers bounced off cold brick walls and vanished into smoke. The gym was Vincent's cathedral. The old trainer, Mickey Roselli, swore he'd never seen a kid hit harder with so little emotion. "He fights like he's solving a math problem," Mickey said. But it wasn't the love of boxing that brought Vincent back day after day. It was the structure, the rhythm, the silence between punches. Every jab was a lesson in control. Every round a rehearsal for something bigger. He didn't fight for glory. He fought to disappear. While the other kids bragged about knockouts, Vincent walked home alone, bruised and silent. Sometimes he'd linger at the gym long after closing, staring at the ring ropes like they held a secret. Mickey once asked, "You wanna go pro, Chin?" Vincent just shook his head and whispered, "I'm already working on something." Years later, Mickey would realize he wasn't training a fighter. He was training a killer. They called him the Chin because of the way he tucked it in the ring, but it stuck long after the gloves came off. He started doing small jobs for the Genovese family, numbers, protection, intimidation. But Vincent didn't muscle his way up. He outwaited, outwatched, outlived. Other young soldiers tried to impress the bosses with violence. Vincent impressed them by never needing to. When a capo vanished after skimming profits, Vincent was the last one seen speaking to him. No one asked questions. Gigante's silence was his weapon. He didn't talk in meetings. He listened. And when he finally spoke, it meant someone was about to bleed. His rise was slow and deliberate. A whisper here, a favor there. By the time he was 25, he had more power than men twice his age. He wasn't just climbing the ladder, he was pulling it up behind him. Vincent's first kill didn't make headlines. It made silence. A lone shark named Sal Tedesco had been leaking details to a rival crew. One night, he walked into a bar. He never walked out. No witnesses. No screams. Just an empty stool and a bloodstain near the jukebox. The cops chalked it up to a mugging. But the streets knew better. That night, Vincent became something else. Not just a soldier, but a ghost in the system. He didn't kill for rage or show. He killed because it needed to be done. The hit was clean. Professional. Pari. No fingerprints. No noise. That's when the higher-ups started noticing. "The Chin's got ice in his veins," one of them said. But even then, Vincent kept quiet. He never bragged. He simply cleaned his hands and waited for the next shadow to fall. By the time he was 30, Vincent Gigante had become indispensable. Not because he was loud, but because he was loyal. To Vito Genovese, he was the blade that never missed. He didn't just follow orders, he fulfilled destinies. He handled the dirty work with surgical precision, often disappearing for days without explanation, only to return with silence and results. No one ever saw him lose his temper. No one ever heard him raise his voice. But his name began to echo across boroughs, a quiet threat wrapped in bathrobe softness. When Genovese needed someone to send a message without saying a word, he sent Vincent. And the message always landed. In alleyways. In firebombed shops. And in the eyes of men who stopped sleeping with the lights off. Vincent didn't crave fear. He created it by existing just out of sight, always one step before the scream. The 1980s brought fire to the streets and blood to the sidewalks. The mission was under siege. The FBI had wiretaps in restaurants, bugged cars, flipped soldiers. Trust evaporated. The old ways, silent, sacred, were breaking. But not Vincent's. While other bosses held meetings and made calls, Vincent walked the streets in his robe, mumbling to street signs and church pews. He was untouchable because he was untraceable. While the feds chased flashier targets, the Chin expanded his empire. He bought judges, owned unions, buried rivals. His men operated like phantoms. They spoke in nods and gestures, delivered messages inside loaves of bread, used funeral homes for drop-offs. And when the FBI finally caught a glimpse of Gigante's moves, all they found was a ghost in slippers. The chaos was everywhere, but Vincent controlled it like a conductor, directing an orchestra of fear. Inside the families, paranoia spread like gasoline. Vincent knew the game had changed. Bugs were in the walls. Rats wore suits. Loyalty wasn't bought anymore. It was borrowed, then flipped under pressure. So Gigante moved underground, literally. Meetings were held in basements, beneath funeral parlors and butcher shops. Conversations took place while water dripped from pipes and rats scurried in the shadows. No electronics. No names. Just eyes and silence. He stopped trusting even his own capos. Some he demoted without explanation. Others vanished entirely. His rules were iron. No phones, no meetings without his sign-off. No one spoke his name. They called him a friend of ours. That was all. The Chin turned the Genovese family into a whisper network, so layered in silence that even the CIA couldn't trace the chain of command. But power always draws fire. A new generation of agents, hungry for headlines, set their sights on Gigante. Operation Ivy was born. Undercover men infiltrated bookie rings, tailed associates, staked out funeral homes. Still, Gigante's name never appeared. He was a myth, a rumor wrapped in bathrobes and mumbles. But then a mistake cracked the surface. A low-level runner got sloppy. He was recorded referencing the Chin during a pickup. The wiretap reached Washington. Suddenly, Vincent wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a priority. The CIA joined forces with the FBI, believing Gigante's criminal network might overlap with international money laundering and foreign assets. But every time they pushed, the trail vanished. Vincent wasn't just hiding, he was folding the map behind him. His madness wasn't protection anymore. It was armor against a war no one could see coming. Even as the walls closed in, Vincent expanded. He controlled construction sites, labor unions, garbage routes. He siphoned millions from the city without ever signing a paper. He used shell companies, dead men's names, and handshake deals sealed in confessionals. His brothers ran fronts across the boroughs. His priests delivered coded sermons. And his enemies, those who questioned, hesitated, resisted, they disappeared. A crane accident on a city project. A fire in a Bronx warehouse. A car bomb mistaken for gang violence. Nothing ever traced back to him. The Chin wasn't just a mob boss. He was a myth, a living ghost story whispered through gritted teeth in city council rooms and NYPD locker rooms. And every time someone asked, "Is he really crazy?" the answer came back the same. Crazy enough to be king. But not everyone bowed. A younger soldier named Tony Ardino started asking questions. Why the secrecy? Why the robes? Why was no one allowed to talk about Vincent directly? He made the mistake of voicing doubts at a private card game. The room fell silent. Within a week, Tony was gone. His car found idling on the George Washington Bridge, door wide open, keys still in the ignition. No body. No blood. Just a silence that screamed. From that point on, no one questioned the Chin again. His madness was no longer just strategy. It was religion. His followers treated his whispers like scripture. To cross him was heresy. And heretics didn't get second chances. They got erased. Vincent had built more than an empire. He had built a church of silence. And the city knelt to it in fear. It started with a whisper from inside his own house. The feds had flipped someone. Not a foot soldier. Not a cousin. His own daughter's husband, Frank Lucchese. A quiet man, a bookmaker with clean hands and a nervous smile. No one suspected him. Not even Vincent. But Frank had cracked under pressure. He was feeding details to the FBI in exchange for immunity and witness protection. He gave them drop points, burner numbers, even the name of a priest who moved cash across state lines. He never spoke Vincent's name directly. He didn't have to. The pattern painted a portrait clearer than a confession. When the FBI laid it all out in a closed-door session, the agents thought they'd struck gold. But one question hung in the air. How long before Vincent finds out? Because when he does, someone's going to disappear. And this time, it won't be silent. The chin didn't react. Not at first. When the whispers reached him, he simply blinked and kept walking. Slippers dragging. Eyes lost in the distance. But his silence was thunder. Within 24 hours, Frank Lucchese's home was burned to the ground. His wife, Vincent's daughter, was taken to a safe house upstate. She never returned to the city. And Frank? Gone. No witness protection. No witness protection. No trial. Just vanished. His name struck from all ledgers. The agents panicked. They had underestimated the chin. While they were debating legal motions, Vincent had erased a human being. No signature. No trace. Only a cautionary tale. From that moment on, anyone in the family who even thought about cooperating remembered what happened to the man who married the chin's blood and then bled for it. But the betrayal went deeper. Months later, another name surfaced, Father Moretti. The man who had baptized Vincent's children, who heard his confessions, who delivered envelopes during Mass. The feds had gotten to him too. A priest with a conscience and a fear of dying behind bars. He handed over coded notes, hinted at names, whispered about Gigante's rituals. When Vincent heard, something inside him broke, or hardened. He stared at the chapel wall for over an hour. Then he made a call. Days later, Father Moretti fell from the choir loft. The police ruled it an accident. But the organist swore he saw two men exit the church minutes before the fall. They didn't run. They walked. Calm. Daring. Like they knew God wasn't watching anymore. That was the moment Vincent lost something sacred. And something darker took its place. It wasn't just enemies who turned. It was blood. Vincent's own brother Mario had been skimming off union contracts. Just a little at first, then millions. Gigante had trusted him, let him run fronts, sit at the table. And now, betrayal. When the books came up light, Vincent didn't say a word. He invited Mario to dinner. Cooked the pasta himself. Poured the wine. They laughed like boys again. But when Mario left that night, he was never seen again. No obituary. No funeral. Just rumors. That his body was in the Hudson. That he'd been buried beneath the very construction site he'd stolen from. To Vincent, the betrayal wasn't about money. It was about trust. And he would rather lose a brother than let silence be broken. That was the price of blood. And the chin paid it in full. With the walls closing in and betrayals stacked like corpses, Vincent Gigante did the unthinkable. He vanished. Not in body, but in mind. He stopped speaking entirely. Wouldn't answer the phone. Wouldn't look anyone in the eye. He walked aimlessly, mumbled incoherently, slept in church pews, let his beard grow wild. His lawyers called it a mental break. The newspapers mocked him. But his crew knew better. This was the final act. The ultimate shield. The Chin had buried too many friends, burned too many bridges, and now the only way to survive was to become untouchable in plain sight. The city watched a man unravel. But what they didn't see, what they refused to believe, was that even as he slipped into madness, he never stopped pulling the strings. The devil had gone deeper underground, and hell was now a whisper in a bathrobe. The trial began with the sound of handcuffs. After decades of dodging subpoenas and dancing through investigations, Vincent Gigante was finally indicted. Racketeering, murder, conspiracies, obstruction. But when they brought him into court, he looked half dead, slumped in a wheelchair, muttering nonsense, wearing pajamas under a trench coat. Cameras flashed. Reporters laughed. But the prosecutors weren't smiling. They'd been here before. Every doctor said Vincent was mentally unfit. Schizophrenia. Dementia. Delusions. He couldn't even name the president, they said. But behind those glassy eyes was a man who had fooled the entire justice system for over 20 years. Some said it was an act. Others swore he was gone. But no one could prove it. And as the trial dragged on, one question pulsed beneath every headline. Was Vincent Gigante truly insane, or just the most dangerous actor in American history? But the eye had a trump card. Anthony Gaspipe Casso, former underboss of the Lucchese family, turned government informant. Casso didn't just name names. He spat them out like poison. And he pointed directly at Gigante. It was all fake, he said. He was sharp as a blade. He told them about secret meetings, coded instructions, murders approved with nods from behind stained glass windows. The courtroom went still. Gaspipe wasn't a saint, but he was credible enough to shake the myth. Suddenly, the act didn't seem so convincing. The robes, the mumbling, the aimless walks, they began to unravel. Even some of Gigante's loyalists started to wonder. Had they all been pawns in a game he'd already won? Or was this just one more layer in the labyrinth of Vincent's lies? Vincent's lawyers clung to the insanity defense. Medical records. 1. Expert witnesses. Old surveillance of him urinating in public, talking to parking meters, weeping during mass. They painted a portrait of a broken man, a relic of a cruel world, mentally adrift. But behind the scenes, the Genovese family was still running like clockwork. Orders were still being given. Rackets still paid out. And Vincent's son, Andrew, had quietly stepped into the fold. The dynasty didn't just survive. It adapted. In court, the old man looked ready for hospice. In backrooms, the empire shifted hands. The final betrayal wasn't from Vincent to the law. It was from Vincent to the myth itself. He let them believe he was too far gone to prosecute, while his family tightened their grip. Insanity wasn't a weakness. It was succession. But fate always has a final card. In 1997, after years of evasion, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty. Win. The Chin was sentenced to federal prison. No parole. No more hearings. Just a cell. But even in prison, the myth endured. He wandered the yard in silence. Slept 12 hours a day. Refused most visitors. Some guards swore he was faking. Others said he never came back from whatever world he disappeared into. The Underworld buzzed. The king had fallen, but the throne was still warm. And even as Gigante disappeared behind bars, his whispers still echoed through New York's criminal courts, through boardrooms, through funeral parlors, and butcher shops. Because when you rule in silence, your voice never dies. It becomes legend. In the end, there was no confession, no tears, no redemption. Vincent Gigante died as he lived, in silence. December 2005. A prison hospital bed. No visitors. No priest. Just the buzz of fluorescent lights and the quiet hum of machines. The Chin was gone. But the damage he caused, the lives he ended, the fear he cast like a shadow, all of it remained. His death was reported in a whisper. A paragraph on page 7. But the streets remembered. Every alley, Every brick in the village, every envelope slid across a table still carried his echo. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a ghost. And even now, when someone walks past a quiet old man muttering to himself in a robe, they look twice. Because the devil doesn't always scream. Sometimes, he shuffles. After Gigante's death, the silence didn't end, it deepened. His funeral was small. Closed casket. No flowers. Just family, a few old lieutenants, and the kind of cold stares that come from men who survived too long. The priest barely spoke his name. No one cried. No one smiled. But the whispers started again. Not about the death, but about who would rise next. The Chin had never declared a successor. He didn't leave blueprints, just shadows. The Genovese family split quietly, fracturing into factions, each one claiming they carried his legacy. But there was no roar of ambition. Only careful steps. The fear he created had outlived him. The message was clear. If silence built an empire, noise would destroy it. So they obeyed the ghost. Even in the grave, Vincent Gigante commanded respect. Vincent's absence created a vacuum, but not a collapse. The Genovese family didn't die, it adapted. They spoke even less. Met even deeper underground. Technology changed, but the code didn't. No phones, no names. They studied the Chin's playbook like gospel. It became part of initiation rites. Learn the silence, live the silence. While other families fell apart, taken down by hot tempers and louder crimes, the Genovese tightened. Their ranks thinned, but their control never faded. Vincent didn't leave a will. He left a method. A blueprint of paranoia, precision and power by omission. And as the feds turned their attention elsewhere, they realized something chilling. The quiet ones were still breathing. And they were watching everything. Law enforcement tried to dissect the legend, to learn from the silence that outmaneuvered them. Training manuals referenced Gigante's methods. Case studies at Quantico bore his name. But none of it explained how he'd fooled them for decades. It wasn't just the madness. It was the method. He'd blurred the lines between illness and intention so thoroughly, even those closest to him didn't know where the act ended. Agents obsessed over video footage of him stumbling into churches, staring at fire hydrants, mumbling prayers backwards. But the truth was simpler and darker. He'd understood the system better than anyone. Understood its arrogance. He knew they'd never believe someone that powerful could pretend to be powerless. And that was his greatest victory. Not what he built, but what he got away with. For the families left behind, the mothers, the brothers, the sons of the vanished, the silence was unbearable. No answers. No graves. No peace. Just long nights staring at doors that never opened, dialing numbers that never rang back. For every empire Vincent built, a dozen lives crumbled. And the ones who survived? They carried his shadow. His name wasn't spoken at dinner tables. His photo was turned to the wall. To them, he wasn't a boss or a legend. He was the man who took everything and left nothing but ghosts. Some tried to forget. Others never could. Because when silence takes someone, it doesn't echo. It haunts. And for those caught in his wake, the price of his empire was paid in grief too quiet to name. Years later, a retired agent stood at the foot of Vincent's grave, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the name etched in stone. "We never got him," he muttered. "Not really. They got the body. They got the charge. But the soul of it, the machine, that stayed hidden. Like the man himself. He'd watched colleagues lose sleep chasing Gigante, watched prosecutors lose careers, watched families fall apart trying to understand a man who never gave them a clean answer. And now, standing in the rain, the truth felt colder than the stone beneath his feet. Gigante didn't just outlive the law. He rewrote its rules. "There's no retirement plan for ghosts," the agent whispered. And as he turned away, he knew the Chin hadn't just fooled them. He'd won. In the years that followed, Vincent Gigante became legend. Not in the newspapers or textbooks, but in whispers, old-timers at coffee counters, corner barbershops where the past still lingered. Young wise guys asked, was he really crazy? The old ones would smile, shake their heads, and mutter, crazy like a fox. His name became shorthand for vanishing power, for playing the system so masterfully that even justice seemed unsure. The Chin didn't die in prison. He faded into folklore. In every city where power moves in silence, his ghost walks beside them. Not as a warning, as a blueprint. They study him, not for the violence, but for the patience, for the art of vanishing in plain sight, for how to make the world believe your greatest weakness was your greatest strength. Modern law enforcement still debates Gigante's case. He appears in slideshows during federal training seminars, under the heading, Behavioral Manipulation in Organized Crime. But no one can agree, was it all performance? Or did the madness consume him in the end? His psychological evaluations remain sealed. Some agents say he fooled everyone. Others believe he fooled himself. What they all agree on is this: the moment you start thinking you're smarter than the criminal, you've already lost. The Chin proved that. He weaponized doubt, confusion, and humility. He wasn't just a mob boss. He was a psychological architect who designed his downfall as part of his survival, and in doing so, blurred the line between myth and man forever. But outside the institutions, the streets remember something different. They don't remember the wheelchair, or the court hearings, or the pajamas. They remember the fear, the sudden disappearances, the bakery that exploded, the priest who fell, the families that never found peace. For them, Gigante wasn't some misunderstood mastermind. He was the storm that passed without warning. And when it was over, everything was quieter, but colder. Businesses still pay silent dues in his name. His family still walks the city in silence, untouched. The Chin isn't seen, isn't spoken of, but he's there, in the space between threats. In the way the city flinches when a door closes too softly. In the way no one ever answers the phone on the first ring. For his family, the silence was eternal. Andrew Gigante stepped back from public life. His sisters moved upstate. They rarely gave interviews. When asked, they simply said, "He was our father." Nothing more. No glorification. No denial. Just a wall of quiet grief. Behind closed doors, his name still carried weight, but not pride. Regret. Fear. The kind you inherit, not invite. His grandchildren learned about him in newspaper clippings and YouTube documentaries. They asked why he dressed like that, why people were afraid. And the answers came slow, guarded, distant. Because legacy, when soaked in blood and secrets, is not something you pass down. It's something you survive. They say legends die in fire. But Vincent Gigante died in silence. No blaze of bullets. No mob war finale. Just a whisper, a mutter, a shuffling step into darkness. And maybe that was the plan all along. Because the Chin never wanted to be seen. He wanted to vanish. To become the absence. The missing link. The unexplained. And he succeeded. Today, there are men in high places who still follow his code. Not because they believe in it, but because it worked. A bathrobe. A blank stare. A silent empire. That was his masterpiece. And when people ask how he got away with it all, the answer is always the same. He walked into the storm wearing a bathrobe, and came out invisible.